Tonight you join me for my longest ever ambient video full of new stories. Each time you hear my voice, the ambience will change. Try and keep an ear out for that. I have some exceptionally talented narrators here. 20 stories tonight that you haven't heard will be heard. And I have handpicked and translated the story for each narrator to suit their voice and styles to celebrate 10,000 subs. So thank you so much everyone who helped me get here. New friends as well as old, I'd like to introduce to you some of my friends, people who've helped me along the way in more ways than just lending their voice for collaboration. There will be some new voices to some of you, and hopefully, some you recognize. All I ask is that we treat everyone with respect. I really enjoyed creating this. It was 6 months in the making, roughly 25,000 words translated, and an untold amount of stories read to find these scary ones, and I really like these ones. There is a mix of human horror and the paranormal. All sorts really, lots of variety, so stick around. I don't often ask, but please remember to drop a like, comment, share, subscribe. And I don't have a Patreon or a members, so if you want to support the channel, please feel free to buy me a beer. Love a beer. Link below and on my banner. It would be much appreciated as I wanted to keep adverts minimal on this one. But your support in just watching this video is more than enough for me. Enough of old J Nightmares waffling on. Let's get started. I grew up in a rural village on the coast of Shikoku. This experience took place on my 6th birthday. That's a long time ago, and you'll have to remember that I was a kid when this took place, so perhaps the lines between reality and imagination have been slightly blurred. However, by the end of this, I think you'll agree that it's an unforgettable experience. I will try to stick just to the facts of what happened on the night of my 6th birthday. I had a really bad fever. My parents thought that it was just a cold, and I would just sweat it out by the evening. But they were wrong. My fever hit 40 degrees, and my mum decided to take me to the hospital. By this time, it was really late at night. I was bundled into my mum's car and driven to the hospital. I think we left at about midnight. I'm not sure if this is the case for everyone, but in my experience, people who live in rural areas like my hometown really don't like to call out ambulances, especially late at night. They don't want to wake up their neighbors or give them any gossip, so that's why we drove to the hospital. The number of patients are fewer in the countryside. I have never seen the emergency rooms or doctors' offices as busy as the movies and TV shows make them seem. We pulled into the hospital parking lot. There were only a handful of cars there. The whole area felt wasted. The parking lot was huge and dark. My mum parked the car and she went inside to see if there was a doctor free. My mum left me in the car. I heard the sounds of autumn insects chirping away. The noise of the bugs felt like they were buzzing around inside my head as I was drowsy with the fever. There was a wind out and I could hear it through the gap in the window. The window was only down a crack, so it made that weird howling vacuum sound. I don't know how long I was alone in the car waiting before it happened, but it felt like a matter of seconds. I heard a voice, and it said the following. "Hey buddy, can you open the door for me?" I thought that my mother was back at first, but I thought about it. My mother had the keys. Why would she ask her fever-ridden son to open the passenger door for her? "Hey, open the door," the voice called again. It was a very sweet voice. It wasn't aggressive or assertive. It was more like a comforting voice, a voice you could trust. At this point, I hadn't even bothered to look towards the window, but the voice, it got me to pull my head out of the covers and look towards the passenger side door. I guess that it could have been my mum. Maybe. I turned to face the owner of that voice. There was a woman with her hands pressed against the glass and her face so close to the window. Her nose almost touched the glass. It wasn't my mum. The woman's face was a very pale shade of white. I can remember my first thought. I just sat there thinking, wow, what a beautiful woman. It makes me laugh when I think back on that first impression. Why was that the first word that came to mind? It was accurate, though. She had a beautiful, symmetrical face, as best I recall. I guess that she was in her 20s. She had kind of cute, chubby cheeks. The most surprising things I can remember about her was her pale face and her red lips. So you're gonna open the door? Your mum sent me here to take you to the hospital. Just think of me as a big sister. Don't worry, just open the door. We'll go see your mum and the doctor. I remember being told something like that. As a child, I was always afraid of disappointing adults. I didn't want to be in trouble. Do you know what I mean? Adults always know best, and they don't like to be questioned on their actions. I guess that I should trust this big sister of mine. She was probably going to take me to the hospital, right? Maybe my mum was worried about me being left alone in the car or something. Maybe that person was sent out by the staff to help carry me into the hospital. Well, that made sense to me. I guess that as soon as I left, the quicker I would be back home, so I figured I might as well get on with it. I didn't want to be in the car anymore, and I didn't like the feeling of leaving someone waiting outside, especially an adult. It gave me a sense of anxiety. I was feeling kind of lightheaded and confused, so I reached out for the door handle to answer the stranger's request. As soon as my fingers touched the cold metal of the door handle, I instantly hesitated. It was as if something woke up inside of me. I was afraid of what was outside of the door, and I knew that I needed to keep it shut. I didn't want to raise my head to meet the eyes of the woman, because I knew that I would be letting her down by not opening the door. I hung my head and retreated as far back as I could into my chair. I couldn't stand how awkward it had become. I just had to look. I guessed that about 3 to 5 seconds had passed before I couldn't stand it anymore. I looked into that woman's eyes and I felt nothing but terror. I sat there, our eyes locked, and I just shook my head from side to side to indicate the international symbol for no. What happened next is something I don't think I'll ever forget. She seemed to pull me towards her with her eyes. She glared at me as a snake does to its prey. She then opened her mouth and I heard her scream the following: "Open it! Open it!" She screamed and shouted it, extending the syllables. It was as if the voice was coming from the pit of her stomach. My head went blank. That's the only way I can describe it. I was so scared that I daren't move a muscle. It felt like my whole body was floating. And that's gotta be the fever, but hey, what's the sense in skipping over how I felt? I'm just here to tell you my experience. I was so scared that she was gonna get in. The way she went from being super nice to super angry really frightened me. I covered myself in the blanket and slipped down into the footwell and faced the other way. I just couldn't look at that woman anymore. It was all too much. "Hey, come on, what are you doing? Open the damn door, come on." When she saw that I made no attempt to open the door, she drifted from the passenger side door. My heart turned to ice when I heard the handle of the door behind the passenger seat be tried. When I felt the safety of the clunking sound that proved the door was locked, I was instantly relieved. That was until she moved around to the back of the car, and she stood next to the back seat door on the opposite side. Was it locked? I really hoped so. I felt more than just the heat and sweat of a fever. This was worse. I was genuinely worried. I was worried until I realized something. My mum locked the car doors with her key fob. There was no way that that creepy woman would be able to get in without the keys or without me opening the door for her. I retreated under the blanket again, and I just tried to wait it out. I heard that woman change from her angry and demanding voice back to her sweet and coercing voice. Well, they say you can catch more bees with honey than vinegar, right? I just buried my head into that blanket and tried to ignore her pleas for me to open the door. Imagine the shock and fear that I felt as a kindergartner. She nearly had me convinced at one point when she started to tell me about how angry my mum was going to be when she found out about this. Now imagine that shock intensifying when I heard the car door open. I literally felt my spine become stiff and unmovable. "Hey, come on, they have someone to see us now. What are you doing, falling asleep?" I was so shocked, but I looked up and I confirmed that it was my mother. The other woman had disappeared. After I saw the doctor, I told my mother about what had happened. She was sure that the woman was a would-be kidnapper, and had I been more naive, I wouldn't be here telling you this. I ain't lying when I tell you that I can still see that woman's face whenever it's dark, that white face with the red lipstick, a face that is so pleased to see you yet so quick to anger. It's something you don't forget. I came so close that day, so close. I don't need to tell you about the missing person cases that there are in the world, let alone the abduction cases in relation to hospitals. It was a very close call. By the way, I had the mumps in the end, if anyone's interested.
There are numerous sufferers of sleep paralysis across the globe. It's said to affect all kinds of people, all kinds of members of society. It may not affect everyone, but I want to share my experience. There are some theories out there that say that you're more likely to get sleep paralysis when you're overly tired, but for me, sleep paralysis tends to strike when I fall asleep on my back. I don't mean every night or anything like that. It's just the only thing I remember that was different that night. By the end of my recital of my experience, you'll likely understand why I always sleep on my side nowadays. No matter how much I want to roll over onto my back, those few moments of discomfort before sleep, they're not worth risking sleep paralysis or a repeat of what happened this night. So on the night in question, I woke up on my back in the middle of the night. I felt a strange numbness in my fingers and my toes. They felt odd, so I wanted to flex them. Stretch a little to relieve that weird feeling. However, when I tried, I found that I couldn't move them. They felt stiff. It's hard to explain, like they were made of stone or something. This, of course, is a terrifying realization in the middle of the night. I felt beads of sweat gathering on my brow. I'd never experienced anything like it before. I remember trying to move my fingers. I was putting all of my strength into moving them. I got to the point where I felt as if my eyes were bulging out of their sockets with the mental effort I was trying to exert. Clearly, it didn't work. Next, I tried a different tactic. I tried to calm down a little. What else could I do? I didn't have much else to focus on, so for some reason I decided to count the wrinkles or lines on my ceiling. I just wanted a sense of normalcy. By the way, if you ever try what I did, look at the lines in the ceiling, you'll see how wide the room is. That was just something I noticed. I got tired of the ceiling, and being as the only thing I could control was my eyes, I looked around the room. But then suddenly my eyes fell on something at the foot of my bed. There were 4 yellow eyes peering at me. It was horrifying. Imagine these cold, yellow lights at the end of your bed. You see them just over the arches of your paralyzed feet. And also, you cannot move. There's no fear like that. My mind was a blur. I felt as if everything in my body had been put on pause. My head was filled with these images that I hadn't seen before. Images I cannot explain or understand. I knew then that somehow those eyes were not human. In my room, there was nothing but darkness and those horrid, glowing yellow eyes. The 2 sets of eyes then suddenly split up. One pair of eyes went to the left side of my bed, the other to the right. The speed the eyes moved at was unnaturally fast. My heart was thundering in my chest. I just wanted to sink into my mattress and disappear. I wanted to close my eyes, but I couldn't. I could feel them drying out, but that was the least of my worries. The glowing, dark yellow eyes approached the side of my pillow. They were studying me. I felt their cold glow all up and down my body. What are you? I wondered. My heart rate was causing my vision to blur. I could hear how labored my breathing had become. I could feel a tightening in my throat. The yellow eyes then focused on my own eyes, from left to right. I felt my face get hotter and hotter, and then, I guess the fragile grasp I had of my own consciousness was severed. The last memory I have of that night was seeing nothing but those yellow eyes gradually fade out to black. There isn't really much more I can tell you about that night, to be honest. I'm not sure if I want to know any more details. I guess it doesn't sound that scary when you write it. Maybe I cannot put into words how I felt at the time because, for me, whenever I think back on that night, an ice-cold shiver races up my spine when I'm reminded of the eyes.
And this happened during the summer of my 4th year of college. At the time, I was living in a student dorm in a quiet residential area. I moved in during my 3rd year of college. The rent was so cheap and the age of the building wasn't that bad. It was pretty modern. I felt like I was getting a really good deal, so I jumped at the chance. I was doing pretty well at college. I had already gotten most of my grades I needed by the time this experience took place. It seemed like I wouldn't have any issues graduating. This left me with tons of time on my hand, and so much that often I was up super late playing video games, reading, or just surfing the net. Like I said, it was summer, and it was a hot one too. Now, I don't like using the air conditioning all that much. I was poor, and I was certain that too much air conditioning made me sick. I'm still convinced of this, by the way. So, whenever I was hot, I would just open the windows and leave the door open with just the screen door. That way the bugs wouldn't get inside. When it came to the nighttime, I would shut the front door obviously, and then I would pull the curtain shut. Once again, so that way the bugs didn't get in. My apartment wasn't that big, so as long as I had a window open someplace, I'd have enough airflow to be cool enough. I used to sit at kind of an angle facing the TV with my controller in hand while playing games until I got tired. Damn, gaming's addictive. It was a great time, being able to kick back and immerse myself without worrying about studying and what time I had to get up in the morning. There was one night around 3 a.m. that it was particularly humid that night. The air was very sticky. I was fixated on whatever level I was playing that night until I heard a noise. I couldn't place it at first, but then I realized that it sounded like a very hoarse-sounding voice. It was odd because at first it sounded like a distant radio on TV being slowly turned up and down. You know, like someone was messing with the TV remote a couple of houses down. I had allowed myself to believe that it was just some kind of mechanic of the level that I was playing. It was just part of the game. I couldn't convince myself that it was the game for too long, however, because when the game went to a cutscene, I still heard that weird voice. It was at this point that I realized that the voice was coming from outside. I sat there in silence. The game paused, just listening, and there was no mistake. There was someone out there. The hoarse noise, whatever it was that was out there, was making things really creepy. You have to remember that this was, again, around 3 a.m., and the neighborhood was quite quiet. Not the usual college town vibes or noises. And I had been living alone in peace for a long time in my apartment, and this was the first time something like this happened. So it was very unusual. The window I had opened that night was the one directly behind me. Well, the window kind of diagonally facing the TV, and like I said, I was sitting in the chair and playing my game. Well, to be honest, as soon as I figured out that the weird noise wasn't part of the game, I sat bolt upright. I told myself as I shifted around looking over my shoulder that it was a passing drunk. I thought that I would just kind of wait it out until I would hear the voice leave, then I'd just go back to playing my game. I didn't want to attract attention, but I was starting to get really creeped out. I mean, I didn't know if there was a thief just behind me, just behind the curtains, planning on how they would break in. I tried not to look back, and I tried to believe that it was just my imagination, but I couldn't bear it any longer. I couldn't stand that breathing noise. I was sure it was right behind me, at the mouth of the window. While the game was paused, I looked at the dark part of the menu, and I saw the window behind me. There was a thin gap between the curtains, and I was sure that I closed them properly. It was only a couple of nights before I found a mosquito in my bedroom, and you know how difficult it is to find those in the dark. So I always made sure that those curtains were closed. But I saw a dark face looming at me in between the gaps of the curtain. The thing that caught me off guard the most was the fact that the face seemed to be entirely expressionless. It was just a blank canvas, well, apart from the eyes. The eyes of this face were dark, so dark that I almost believed that I was looking at someone wearing a mask. I had never been so terrified in my life. I didn't dare face what was staring at me, but couldn't bring myself not to. I had to prepare myself. I had to be ready. I couldn't just sit there and wait for an attack. I only had my controller in my hand as a weapon, and I thought it was better than nothing. So I gave myself a mental countdown. 3, 2, 1. And then I spun around to face the intruder, only to see the curtains gently billowing in the wind. They were gone. After a couple of seconds, I approached the window, and I hadn't heard that weird rasping breathing sound for a while. I had no idea if someone was still around or if the whole thing had been conjured up by my sleep-deprived mind. As soon as I knew that there was no one directly outside the window, I shut the window and locked it and ran to my bedroom and dove under the covers. I woke up in bed the next morning. I asked myself if I had just woken up from a nightmare. I slowly walked around to the lounge and saw that my game had been paused all night. I knew then that it wasn't some kind of realistic dream at that point. It really weirded me out, so I decided to spend as much time as I could out of the house before graduating, which thankfully wasn't that far off. To this day, I don't even like looking at the TV's reflection in the dark. I don't ever want to see that face again. Sometimes I wonder if that was an intruder or something worse. Maybe something paranormal. But it sure looked really real to me. Maybe it was something to do with why the rent was so low. Maybe this home has a history.
This happened about 5 years ago. I was in my second year of college at the time. I was single and looking for a woman, so I figured I'd download a dating app. After a fair few swipes, I managed to get a match. I couldn't believe my luck. She was really hot. She was slender, but with unreal curves. Pretty much my dream girl. She was straight in with the messages and straight to the point. It seemed like we were both looking for the same thing, so a meetup was set up quickly. We met at a hotel room and it became a regular thing. I always picked up the bill. Lucky for me, I had a part-time job during my studies. I wasn't made of money though, and sometimes it was really tough because I didn't have much cash. One time she contacted me just before payday and I had to turn her down. So she asked me to go to her parents' house. I wasn't ready to meet her parents yet, and as far as I knew, it wasn't that kind of relationship, if you know what I mean. But she messaged me, asking me to sneak in at around 9 p.m., and no one will know I'm there. She lived a bit of a distance away, and I was more than a little skeptical. I hesitated for a while, but the memories of what we got up to in the hotel room persuaded me. She gave me her address, and it was about 10 minutes from a train station. I found the house, and it looked clean and pretty ordinary. I wasn't picking up any bad vibes from the outside. I wasn't overly happy about sneaking in, though. The house did look kind of deserted, but so did a few houses in the area. I was in the middle of nowhere, the backwoods of Saitama. I had to climb up a little to get into her room. It was kind of like a scene from a movie. I got into her bedroom easy enough, though. Her room was covered in pink wallpaper, and there were stuffed animals on the shelf. I could tell that she'd grown up in this room. My parents are asleep in the next room. Don't talk much, okay? My parents will wake up at 7 a.m. Just make sure you're out before then, she whispered to me. Then we got down to it. It was great. It was heightened by that feeling of being caught. After, I went to have my usual smoke. I didn't really have the energy to climb back down. Plus, it seemed a little risky, so I popped the window open. I could tell she really didn't like this idea. She really hated smoking, so I blew the smoke directly out of the window. Then I heard someone say, "I'll kill you." It was a high-pitched female voice, either coming from the hall or the room next to hers. What followed was footfall. Someone was coming to our room. She looked me in the eyes and said, "Hide quickly, you'll be killed." She was on the verge of tears. I could tell that that threat I just heard was more than likely credible. Panic really gripped my heart. The closet seemed to be the only available place that I could hide. The second I silently closed the door, I heard the door to the bedroom be thrown open. I stood there, shaking with fear in just my underwear. Her mother was now in the bedroom, and she sounded pissed. "Did you smoke?" she asked her daughter. "So what if I did?" she replied. "You know you have to be 21 to smoke. What are you doing? You know your dad hates it too." "I won't smoke again then, just get out," she said to her mom. Well, I'm paraphrasing, but that was the gist of it. She was protecting me, and I was grateful. I felt as if I would get away with it. That was until I made one fatal error. I shifted my feet and slipped slightly, causing the back of my head to lightly bang against the wall. The mother-daughter argument stopped abruptly. "Who's in there?" her mom asked. I heard the door open to the bedroom briefly. I thought that the mom left out of embarrassment, but just as quickly as those footsteps left, they returned and they approached the closet. I tried to hold the door shut with all my strength, but one pull from her mom threw the closet doors open. "Who are you?" she asked while glaring at me. I was up the creek without a paddle. She looked me up and down. The front of my gray underwear had begun to change color with the tension. "If you don't leave now, you'll die. For real." I looked down and noticed she was holding a hammer. Not the standard household hammer, but more like a mallet. It looked like the end of a sledgehammer. I got the hell out of there as quickly as possible. I didn't need to be asked twice. That look on her face told me that she was stone cold serious. I ran back to the train station while simultaneously getting dressed. Because of the time I left, I could only get about halfway home, so I spent the night in some weird train station. Later, I sent an apology message. The response I received made me realize how close a call I just had. That's okay, don't worry. I'm just really glad that Dad didn't wake up. He's in a gang. Every time he meets a boyfriend, he scares them off. He once took one for a drive, and I didn't see him again. I hope he doesn't find you. So when her mom said, "If you don't leave now, you'll die," she wasn't just trying to scare me. She was trying to warn me of her gangster husband. A part of my mind prayed for it to be a joke, because I'm pretty sure I told her where I lived. She seemed a little sketchy now. It seemed to me she was enjoying the scare I had. She sent that email, and then I heard nothing more from her. I got off the apps and didn't meet anyone in places I haven't before, and I told people where I was going when I did meet someone new. I'm taking life a little more seriously these days.
This happened a long time ago, but I think about it often. When I was a teenager, I used to go out all the time. I used to stay out until 1 or 2 a.m. most nights. I would meet up with my friend and we would always do the same kind of thing. We never had anything planned, we just hung out. Like I said, usually I would go home at around 2 a.m., but that night, we were out a little later. We hung out near an arcade. It was our regular spot. We would play games in the arcade until midnight, which was when it closed, and then after that, we would go to convenience stores and just chat for a while in my friend's car. So that night, just before 2 a.m., my friend and I were talking about going home, but we got a little sidetracked. I looked at my phone and it was 2:58, so I told my friend that I had to get going. My friend said he would drive me home, but I had just lit a smoke, so I said to him, "Give me a minute to finish this and I'll be ready." And he just said that he would wait for me in the car. He wasn't a smoker, and he was super proud of his car, so he never let me smoke in there. I don't think I had ever stayed out so late before. Even though it was just an hour after the time we usually go home, it felt somehow different. I was dazed by a dancing cloud of bugs swarming beneath an electric light. Then suddenly, the light shut off. I guess that it was preset to turn off at 3 a.m. or something. It's not that unusual to see the street lights go off around that time of night. There is one near my home that does the same thing. I can see it from my window. So I wasn't surprised to see the light go out, but for some reason, that night, fear hit me like a ton of bricks when I was plunged into almost darkness. Beneath the light where the light had been shining, I saw a shadow. It was illuminated by the moonlight and the faint neon glow of the adjacent store signs. The shadow looked like it belonged to a woman with really long hair. The neon lights that cast their light on her were blue and flashing, so I just stood there staring at this shadowy figure, completely in awe. She was only a couple of feet away from the light, so she should have been visible when the light was on. I knew I was out there alone, but as the lights went out, the shadow appeared. It simply couldn't be possible. The light continued to flash against her. It was doing a kind of blast of 3 flashes, and then it would go dark for like half a second. The shadow was really beginning to frighten me. I hated the way she stood there facing towards me, just staring in the darkness. Her limbs looked really long too. The neon light did its 3 flashes, and then during one of the half-second pauses between the next burst of the lights, the shadowy figure disappeared. It was just me alone on the dark streets. Something inside me snapped. I needed to get the hell out of there. I skittered backwards, letting out a scream, and I dropped my smoke as I tried to grab the handle of the car door. I got in, giving my friend a fright. I told him to get going, and then we drove off. What the hell was that? Had the shadow figure been watching my friend and I every night we hung out in our usual spot? didn't manifest itself because I was alone that time? I still have so many questions. It was honestly terrifying. Well, my friend and I haven't been back to our usual spot since that night. Even though he didn't see or experience what I did, he still wants to stay away. I have frequently mentioned this story to my friends, family members, and colleagues over the years, but no one has provided me with any kind of satisfying reasoning for what happened, and no one I know had a similar experience. Even to this day, when I hit the lights to go to bed, I am terrified. I don't want to see a figure standing in my room, lit up by the standby light of my TV, or out of the corner of my eye from the glow of my smartphone.
This happened in junior high school, and it's something that I'll never forget. It still gives me trauma to this day. I was at home one afternoon with my sister. We were often home alone after school, waiting for our parents to come home. Sometimes they didn't come back until it was dark out. It was fine for us, we had the whole place to ourselves. And we felt as if we could do anything we wanted. So one afternoon, it was raining outside. The rain was really lashing at the windows. So we had to play indoors. My big sister came up with the genius idea of playing hide and seek. I was kind of tired from all the sports I had done at school that day, but I could never resist a game of hide and seek, especially not at that age. We did rock, paper, scissors for who got to hide first, and I was the winner. My sister spun around and began counting. I raced around the house looking for a decent place to hide. My sister knew all of my usual places, so I thought I would try something new that day. I ran upstairs and I hid in a closet. Before long, I heard my sister count down to 1 and then begin searching for me. I heard the sound of her opening and closing various doors and stuff downstairs. She was probably checking my usual hiding places. I was grinning in the closet. I had her this time. I scooted myself as far back as I could in the closet and hid behind some of the hanging clothes in there. I was confident that even if she opened the closet, I wouldn't be seen in there. The closet was in my parents' bedroom, by the way. They had 2 in there. And I realized I had just found the ultimate hiding place. It was really nice in there, but it was dark. It was a little spooky, but it was all right. I started to get a little sleepy. I might have dozed off for a minute or 2, waiting for my sister to find me. I sat bolt upright in the dark closet when I heard my sister shout out, "I found you." I was all like, okay, I guess that she's just on the other side of the closet door. The door didn't open though. And then I thought to myself, oh sis, is this your new tactic? Shout out that you found me, and then I come out of my hiding place and you win. Sneaky plan, sis, but I'm not leaving the closet. I could still hear my sister's voice outside the closet, in the same room someplace. "I found you, so come on out." I thought, no way, I don't think you have found me. "Hey, come on, hurry up. Get out of there quickly." My sister's voice was quite soft to begin with, but now it had taken on an impatient and quite angry quality. "Get out, don't make me mad at you, get out now." She was mad, and it was pretty scary. I even heard some banging out there. I thought to myself, well, I guess I better come out now, I don't want to ruin the game. So I slowly snuck out of the closet. I will never forget what I saw. My sister was stood in front of the closet, on the other side of the room, and she had hold of a small white arm. She was pulling at it with all her might. She spun around, still holding onto the arm, and that's when I saw it in full view, and I screamed. My sister then screamed, and the arm slowly retracted back into the closet. She slammed the closet door and ran downstairs, and I was hot on her heels. I was so scared that I felt tears beginning to well in my eyes before I was on the last step of the stairs. We cried, and we sat outside on the porch until night, watching the rain fall. We didn't want to be in the same house as whatever was in the closet anymore, and we have no clue who the owner of that white arm was. Was it something paranormal? It looked like it could have been. I have no other way to explain it. When our parents came home, we explained what had happened, and of course they didn't believe us. My dad was adamant on taking us upstairs and showing us what was in the closet, but my sister and I wouldn't go anywhere near it. We kicked and screamed at the suggestion of being near that closet again. It only ever happened that one time though, and we're massively grateful for that. Still to this day, I get freaked out when I have to put my clothes away in the closet. I'm scared that I'll see a little white hand reach out for me.
I hear it when it rains. Silver, underworld. It all started when I was a kid during summer, and because of what happened, it made me hate it whenever I go visit my grandparents in summer vacation. The reason why I hate seeing them during the summer is simple. Bad things happen. My grandparents' house isn't that old, but old enough. Around the house is this kind of gravel moat. They have put gravel and pebbles around on all four walls of the place. It's a really nice looking house. That's not the problem, by the way. In fact, most of the time, the house is just a house. But when certain conditions are met, strange things happen. Let me explain. Basically, something creepy happens when it rains. Whenever it rains, it sounds like someone is walking around the house. All through the night, you can hear the sounds of someone's footsteps crunching on the gravel, slowly going around and around in a seamlessly ending loop. I used to get so scared when I was a kid. I would go running to my grandma and grandpa in tears. I am much older now, and recently, my grandpa passed away, and my grandma then began living with my aunt, which meant that no one was going to be living in my grandparents' house anymore. It also meant that we need to go back and start clearing the house out. They were getting the house ready for sale, and naturally, I was asked to help. The gas and water was shut off, so after a hard day of shifting boxes in the summer sun, I couldn't even take a shower. I head into town because I knew of a place where I can wash up. I had dinner in town too. There was a load more to do the following day, so the plan was to stay overnight. My dad was supposed to stay too, but I saw how much the cleaning and heavy lifting had taken out of him, so I said that it would be fine if I were to finish the job myself in the morning. From about 9 p.m. that night, the heavens opened and rain came flooding down. I knew what I was going to be in for later. Luckily, the electric was still on, so I saved from staggering around the house with a flashlight. The internet was out though. I guess that the only sensible thing I could do was to get some sleep. I didn't like being in this big empty house by myself. It reminded me of all those years ago when I would run to Grandma and Grandpa whenever I got scared. But they weren't here this time. I felt like I didn't know the house well enough to be comfortable here alone. There. And without the distraction of the internet, I found it even harder to relax. I should have picked up a couple of beers in town. I was lying in bed listening to the rain outside. It seemed to be getting worse. I thought that I could just focus on the rain, that I would fall asleep, but I was wrong. I was tossing and turning in bed, but I lay static when I heard a familiar sound. The sound of someone walking on the gravel outside the house. To be honest, my first reaction was, "Oh, you again, huh?" Now that I was older, I didn't need to run away in fear. I could lay there and listen a little. I tried to tap into the logical side of my brain to figure out what the hell that was. I mean, it could be possible that it was a wild animal, maybe rats or a leaky gutter or something. I couldn't convince myself though. To me, it definitely sounded like footsteps. I listened closer and learned something new. It sounded like as if these footsteps would take pauses to stop, and then a moment later, they would start up again. Since I couldn't sleep, I thought that I would try and see if my mom was still up. She has always been a bit of a night owl. Luckily, she was still up. I asked her about Grandma and Grandpa's. Hey, do you know if they had any trouble with rats or anything like that around here? My mom knew what I was talking about. She said something like, all these years later, and you can still hear those noises? I said that I could. She said that she remembered a time when she was younger. Her sisters apparently hated so much that she pleaded with my grandparents to be sent to a boarding school. I always wonder why one went to boarding school and the other didn't. I thought it was down to favoritism. My mom said that if I want to know more, I should speak to my aunt because she never heard any of these footsteps when it rained. I said goodbye and I lay in bed, contemplating on calling my aunt. I listened to the heavy rain and those stilt footsteps circling around the house and decided that I need to ask her. I called my aunt and we spoke about the mysterious footsteps. We got onto the new thing I discovered. When I said that the footsteps stopped and then started again, she asked me what I thought it was. I said something along the lines of, I don't know, maybe whoever those footsteps belong to is looking for something and that's why they can't go away? I was beyond rats and gutter noise theories at this point. I was willing to consider the paranormal. She said, nice idea, but that's not what I thought. I checked myself. The footsteps stop at the windows. Whoever it is trying to look inside. They're not looking for something that they have lost. They're looking for a person. Well, I didn't sleep that night. I just did my work and got out into the morning. I never returned, and I'm glad I didn't. I still think about Grandma and Grandpa's house whenever it rains. Heavily, though.
When I was in high school, I often used a shortcut when I was running late. It was a short path which went through a cemetery. One evening I felt a chill run down my spine while I was walking through there, and then it felt like someone whispered in my ear. It scared the hell out of me, so I ran for it. Later I managed to convince myself that it must have been my imagination, but that night I was proven wrong. Something had started. I woke up in the middle of the night to see a woman stand by my bed. The second I saw her, I was instantly paralyzed. I wasn't able to move anything except my eyes, so I kept my eyes on her. She was wearing modern-day clothes and had short hair, looming over me from the side of the bed, and was grinning. To see the whites of her eyes and her teeth lurching out of the darkness was utterly terrifying. I think at this point I lost consciousness because when I opened my eyes again it was morning. Well, if that would have been the end of my experience with the smiling apparition, then I could have counted myself lucky. But sadly there was more to come. The next night I woke up again and saw that woman. I tried to shut my eyes, but when I did that, she began whispering. I tried a different tactic. I repeatedly told myself that it was just a dream, but doing so didn't make it any easier. It just mentally exhausted me. This happened the next night, and the next. I think that I was noticeably different during that period because my parents, classmates, and teachers were all seemingly worried about me. I even saw looks of sympathy from strangers cast my way. I doubled down with my stubbornness and told myself that it was a dream and I had power over my dreams. Each day I would prepare myself for my nightly battle, but I kept the nightmare woman to myself. I just told anyone who asked me about it that I was having trouble sleeping. I think that I couldn't bring myself to admit what was happening. I stopped being stubborn, and around the 4th or 5th day I just didn't have much fight left in me. I was thinking of going to my parents with my problem, but that night a savior appeared at our home. My cousin. My cousin was going to be spending the night. He lived in a different town and was older. He wanted to go see some museum or exhibition or something in our area, so that's why he was spending the night with us. Despite him being older, he always had time for me and wanted to play games with me. I was far too tired to be any entertainment to him though, and that made me sad. He asked me what was going on and if I was okay. I told him my standard excuse that I hadn't been sleeping well. He said he had a fix for me. When it was time for bed, he'd punch me in the face to knock me out so I could finally sleep. He was of course kidding. It made me laugh and actually helped me relax a bit. I had started dreading the night since this began, and the sun began to go down each day, and I would slowly and surely become more and more anxious, but it was great to have him with me. To be honest with you, that night I slipped into sound sleep. It felt like the first decent sleep I had got in a while. But then right on schedule I found myself waking up at night time. This time it wasn't because I sensed the presence of the woman, it was a more natural reason. I needed to use the bathroom. I wanted to wake my cousin up because I was still worried about the woman, but I didn't want to hold it in any longer, so I had to get up. I left my bedroom and headed down the hall towards the light switch. It must have only been about 5 or 6 paces away. Then before I knew it, the woman was right next to me. My body froze in place, and then my neck turned against my will to face the woman. She wasn't smiling this time, it was worse. She looked furious. A range of emotion ran through my body. I went from outrage to fear. I thought that I could have died right there in the hallway. Just as I was considering that it might be the end for me, the lights came on, and I saw my cousin there. He must have awoken to use the bathroom too. I don't remember much of what happened next, but I did think he was concerned for me. The second the light came on, the woman disappeared. I think he didn't see her. When I got back into bed, I slept soundly for the first time in a long time, and I felt completely at ease when I woke up. My cousin woke up a little after me, and the first thing he said was, I had a nightmare. In his nightmare, he was being strangled by a short-haired woman who smiled the most twisted smile he had ever seen. He woke up to see a woman in the room peering over him, wide-eyed with her hands around his neck. He had basically seen and experienced what I had. He said at one point he was briefly freed from the binds of sleep paralysis, and at that point he asked her a question. If she was a family member or friend or someone who lived here. He then asked if she was a ghost, but he didn't get a reply. And because she wasn't saying anything and still strangling him, he hit her back. He said he hit back as hard as he could. She was straddling him, and he kept hitting. He closed his eyes and he was running out of oxygen, and then suddenly he felt no pressure around his neck. He opened his eyes and the woman was gone. He then went to sleep, which for me is pretty shocking. I told him about my experiences and said that I believed the woman was a spirit that latched onto me during a walk through the graveyard. I don't know if that was a ghost, but something was strangling me for sure, and I definitely hit something, he replied. He believed it was a bad dream and nothing more. He thought he may have punched the wall or something, but my cousin had bruises on his neck the next morning. If they are unrelated, then that's one hell of a coincidence. maybe it was all just a dream. But the fact that it happened to both of us had me doubting that. That was the last time I saw the smiling woman. By the way, I read online that if you ever have sleep paralysis, you can get out of it by trying to click your tongue repeatedly. Advice for next time.
This happened when I was in the third year of junior high school. It was the year that I had to transfer and join a new school. It was a horrible time for me. I was bullied relentlessly at my new school. They picked on me for having a feminine face, in their opinion, of course. I am a boy. I also didn't get my height until I got into high school, so I was pretty short for my age. When you couple that with the fact that I was the new kid, I was pretty much walking into school each morning with a target on my back. At first, it was just a name calling, and I thought that if I ignored it, it wouldn't last long. But I was wrong. It escalated. I guess I should have said something back to them or fought back. I'm not sure if it would have mattered though. One day at school, I was surrounded by this gang of boys who bullied me in the bathroom. Fair warning, this part's a bit graphic, but it might help explain why I didn't tell anyone what was happening at that age. I was forced to ingest the contents of a used toilet. They brought gloves, they restrained me, and forced me to swallow that filth. After they were satisfied with their work, they left, and I ran out of the bathroom. I ran to an alley at the back of the school. It was a place where other students never really went. It wasn't outside of the school grounds. It was just this kind of gap, near the aircon vents. I threw up there and sat on the floor with my head in my hands, crying my eyes out. After a while, I felt as if someone was looking for me. I wiped my eyes and looked up, hoping the gang of bullies weren't back. They weren't. There was a girl stood there looking at me. She was in the year below me. I could tell because we have different colored badges on our uniforms at that school for each year group. She asked, "Are you okay?" And I replied, "I'm fine," and sat there, silently. The bell sounded out, break was over, and it was time to go back to class. I didn't want to go back to class. I thought that she would walk off, but she didn't. She sat on the ground next to me. I said to her, "Class is about to start," and she replied, "That's fine." A moment or two went by, and then she asked, "Why were you crying?" I don't know why, but I told her about the bullying. Maybe because she was the first person at this school who was nice to me. She listened to my every word and responded with non-verbal cues, which encouraged me to keep talking to her. Hearing what I was unable to tell the teachers and my parents caused me to cry even more. I said at one point, "I just want to die." Then the girl said, "Dying doesn't stop the pain. I'm being bullied too, you know. And I don't know, I'm just trying to do my best." In that moment I felt very warm. This was brought on by her kindness and the sense of security she gave me. We promised to one another that if either of us was bullied, we would meet here, in the alley, to be there for one another. After that day, the bullying continued, but it never reached the heights of what happened in the bathroom again. Every time it happened, I would go back to the alley, at the back of the school, and look for her. She was always there waiting for me, and we would talk and life wouldn't seem so bad. We didn't talk much about bullying after our first meeting. We would talk about things that made us happy. We would recount our days and share our happy memories. Talking with her was the definition of the word salvation. I noticed that the bullies fell out with one another, and their little so-called gang split up. It was really great to see that. The bullying was over, but we still met behind the school. Graduation day was approaching, and when it did come, I realized that I was in love with her. I asked her if she would meet me in our usual spot on graduation day, and she said yes. However, when graduation day finally came, I went to the alley and she wasn't there. I waited there for a long time, and she didn't turn up. I'm sure that she wanted to see me one last time before we left school. I couldn't understand it, so I went to the staff room and asked my teacher. I asked her if my friend was absent that day. The teacher asked me what year she was in, and I replied. Her name was an uncommon name, so when I mentioned it, the teacher looked at me really surprised. She looked through the list of names in the register, and then after a while she asked me if I was sure I had the right year group. I said I was sure. I saw the badge on her uniform, so I knew which year she was in. My teacher then said, "We did used to have a student by that name, but she isn't at the school anymore. She hasn't been here for 3 years." I asked what happened to her, and the teacher said that she passed away and wouldn't say any more than that. The outcome was ambiguous. I didn't get to meet her at graduation or ever again. I still have no clue if she was a spirit, a student, or something my bullied psyche created at the time to help me cope with the pain. If it was the latter, then it's a hell of a coincidence. It doesn't matter if I ever get the answers required to stop me asking myself about who she was. If she is a spirit, then I hope she remains at that school to help anyone else who might be going through what I was. I thank her from the bottom of my heart for giving me the strength to carry on and push those dark thoughts I had at the time aside. To this day, I consider her the best friend I have ever had. No matter what you are going through, it gets better.
I heard somewhere online that if you stare at a scrambled channel on TV, you know, the static white snowstorm looking thing, you will go insane. For some reason, when I was younger, I wanted to find out if this was true or not, or at least how long I could stand it before I had to shut it off. I remember it was heavily raining that night, and it seemed just like the perfect setting to try something spooky. I don't know, I guess it's weird, but I have always been interested in the paranormal and the occult, so in order to set the mood, I shut off the lights and made sure that the only light source in my bedroom was that of the TV. I found a scrambled channel with static, and it was perfect. The rain was lashing the windows along with the distant rumble of thunder. Flashes of lightning lit the room, bright white at points. It was amazing. It was the perfect conditions to begin my experiment. I waited until the stroke of midnight and then took my seat at the edge of my bed in front of my TV. I had planned to try to continuously watch it for at least an hour. I even set an alarm so I would remember to look away. It's very weird staring at a screen of static. Eventually you begin to see things. For me, it was a landscape, you know, like some scenery at first. I saw a mountain and a windmill next to it. It was amazing. Then I saw a close-up of a woman's face, followed by a sunken ship in the depths of the sea. You end up seeing many things, but eventually you kind of get tired to it. It's a bit intense for the eyes. My alarm went off on my phone. That hour felt like it had flown by. I turned off the TV and went to bed. I told one of my friends about what I did the following day. I was happy to tell him that I lasted an hour. I was happy that I didn't go insane too. This is where things get weird and hard to believe, but stay with me. My friend lives close to me, right? And he told me that there was a power outage due to the lightning in our area. He said I should quit making things up. Okay, there are two outcomes here. I sat in front of a TV that wasn't on and I saw all those strange things, or my friend is trying to convince me of a phony power outage. Either way, I really don't like seeing static on our TV these days. One thing I will say is that I saw some people working on the power lines the following day, so I really don't know. Maybe it's best not to try this experiment.
Don't climb mountains when the first snow of winter falls. Have you ever heard anyone say that before? I guess it might just be a Japanese thing. By that I mean some kind of urban legend or societal lesson. Maybe even just a good piece of advice. Advice that I wish I had listened to. I was always told not to head into the mountains when the first snow of winter began to fall. I grew up though. I put away urban legends and rumors as if they were childhood toys. By the time this experience took place, I had been climbing and hiking in the mountains for about 3 years. I had grown in that time to be quite independent. By that I mean I was more than willing to head out alone on hiking and camping trips. I had always been quiet, but in recent years I had grown quietly confident, and there is a difference there. I had been accustomed to solo ventures for a while, but I hadn't tried one out in winter, so I thought, what the hell, why not? Snow was falling from the morning, but it wasn't thick snow, only a couple of centimeters deep by the morning. I will admit that there was some small increase in the difficulty brought on by the fresh, wet snow. Thinking back on it, I should say that I felt a little uneasy that morning. I remember heading up into the trail a little more cautiously than usual. I wasn't really sure if I was even heading in the right direction when I got onto the trail. The snow made it difficult to see where I was going. I gained a little more confidence in the direction I was heading in when I noticed some footprints in the snow. Now, when you're walking into the wind, you naturally look at the ground more often than looking at what's in front of you, right? To avoid snow blindness and the wind's buffeting your face, it just makes sense. So when I saw the footprints, I kind of felt as if a weight had been lifted from my chest. Alright, I'm on the right track, that's great, I thought to myself. I took a breather and stooped to take a look at the footprints a little more carefully. I wanted to see if I could figure out which direction to go next. It was only when I took a closer look that I noticed something. I didn't see a shoe print. Well, not one that looked recognizable. What I mean by that is that it didn't look like the owner of these footprints was wearing mountain climbing boots. The print looked way too thin to be a big clunky hiking boot. It was strange. At that point in my life, like I said before, I had been hiking for about 3 years. And that experience was under my belt, and I knew that the route I was on was not a maintained one. It felt as if it was the passage for animals rather than men, if you know what I mean. Those footprints almost made me turn back for that very reason, that they were footprints, not boot prints. There was no shoe prints in the fresh snow, but somewhat foolishly or bravely, it depends on how you want to see it, I continued up into the mountains in the falling snow with no real direction in mind, confident that I would just somehow know how to get back down without issue. My confidence went out of the window a little after I took a break for lunch. It was winter, you see, so the dark came in quicker than it would in summer. The footprints were jarring, but now the light was dying. That was something different. It was time to turn back. I headed back down the mountain, and after a short while, I noticed that I had quickened the speed I was traveling down the mountain. Something caused me to slow down though, something unusual. Those thin, non-boot footprints were back. And there were a lot of them now. I could see at least 3 sets of footprints now. It freaked me out, I cannot lie. It honestly felt as if I was alone on the mountain range, on these trails. I hadn't run into another soul, let alone hear somebody. Those were definitely barefoot footprints. The snow was thicker come the late afternoon, and I could make out the imprints of individual toes. Do you want to know the thing that really scared me about those footprints? They were alongside mine. They looked as if they had followed me up and back down. This wasn't a maintained hiking trail. I thought back on the advice I had received from a veteran climber. I thought it was just a load of old nonsense when he told me at first, but somehow I believed it when I was confronted by the situation I was in. Don't climb the mountains on the first day it snows. You'll see things and experience things that you aren't supposed to. The first snow of winter, it's deadly. Panic was close by. I couldn't stop thinking about the footprints, and now I realized I might have migrated from the trail. I just tried to go down. I figured that I would just follow the footprints, and I would get back on the trail, but I was wrong. I used up so much of my energy trying to get back on the trail that I just ended up becoming distressed. I remember the word distressed popped into my head. I didn't have much choice. I was tired and lost, and I was losing light. I decided to camp and tried to descend in the morning. I wasn't happy about it because I wasn't as prepared as I could have been or should have been, but it wasn't like I had a choice. I literally just had an aluminium foil blanket and a pack of matches. Luckily, I found a big rock I could kind of shuffle under to protect myself from the wind. Thinking back on it, I should never have gone hiking somewhere I was unfamiliar with so few supplies. Even though it had snowed, and was still kind of snowing, the wind had died down, and I was certain that I wouldn't freeze to death. Either way, I thought to myself, I wouldn't be sleeping. So I lay down on my rucksack to have a barrier from the cold ground in my body, and I wrapped that foil blanket around me. Well, I didn't have much else I could do apart from think about my situation, and I thought about the footprints I had seen, and I felt a chill that wasn't due to the weather. I was thinking that maybe those footprints could be from an animal, perhaps a deer, a wild boar, a rabbit. And then I realized that I was trying to deceive myself. I knew that the footprints were far too big, and they were far too human-like to be animals. After a short while, it was pitch black out, and I found myself dozing and then jolting myself awake. I slipped off to sleep for a short while, and then woke to the sound of snow crunching. You know, the sound of someone treading on freshly fallen snow. It sounded like it was approaching from behind the rock I was under. I thought that it was an animal, so I shouted loudly to try and scare it off. When I yelled, I heard the footsteps trail off. I guessed that it was probably something like a wild boar. A few moments went by, and I was wide awake now. I heard the footsteps coming back towards the rock I was under. They sounded a little further away than before, and there was something different about these footsteps. It sounded like it wasn't just one set of footsteps. I thought to myself, oh, you brought your friends, huh? It did freak me out. Wild boar attacks are a thing over here, and they can be fatal. I decided to shout out again and try to scare them off. The footsteps stopped, and I thought I was triumphant. But then the footsteps started up again. They started heading towards me and my rock. It was pitch black and I couldn't really gauge how far away those footsteps were in the dark, but they sounded as if they were creeping closer and closer. I thought about the footprints I saw earlier that day and how human-like they looked. I thought about the sound I had heard, and it sounded to me more and more like a walking sound, not the scuffle of animal hooves or paws. I had never felt terror like that before. Were there people out here with me, in the dark? There were more of them than me, and I couldn't see a thing. I sat there under the rock, and for some reason I started to pray. I'm not a religious person really, but something my grandfather taught me came to mind. It was a Buddhist chant. I closed my eyes and I started chanting. I knew that there wasn't wild boars out there. There were humans out there. I tried to remember and not mess up the chant, but it was near impossible, since the footsteps were getting closer and closer. I could hear the squeak and crunch of the snow right behind the rock. I still couldn't see them though. I just tried to brace myself for whatever would come next. The footsteps started circling me. I felt all hope in seeing the morning light fade away from me. I was beyond petrified at this point. I just kept chanting, expecting to hear the rushing of footfall come towards me, but that, for some reason, didn't happen. They kept their distance, and I kept chanting. After a while, it began to get brighter and brighter out. The footsteps got further and further away as the light grew brighter. My anxiety was lifting, and I was relieved. And by the time I saw the sunrise, I could no longer hear the footsteps. I looked around in amazement. There were dozens of footprints in the snow, all around my makeshift campsite. I was exhausted, but I couldn't help but stand there and stare at those footprints. It looked as if some people had been barefoot when they were circling me last night. Staring at the footprints really scared me, so I packed up and made my descent. After about a half an hour or so, I managed to find the trail I climbed up on the night before. The footprints didn't follow, and I heard no signs of humans on the way back. The whole ordeal mentally exhausted me and single-handedly destroyed my interest in hiking and mountain climbing.
You know when someone shocks you with some ability or talent, people can find it endearing or respect it. You know the kind of thing I'm getting at. Oh, no way. I didn't know you could play the piano. Stuff like that. Imagine naturally discovering that a coworker friend of yours was a prolific volunteer at the local homeless shelter, or a good friend of yours had been supporting a charity in secrecy. They don't do it for the praise. It's just kind of who they are, or it's something that they believe in. Well, what if you reverse that image? I met someone at work that made me believe ignorance can be bliss sometimes. He made me question how well I knew that person that I've been spending 8 to 10 hours a day with each working week. There was a quiet guy that I used to work with. I'm just going to call him T. I'll be honest here. He was pretty awful at his job. And pretty is putting it mildly. He was so bad that some of the other employees shunned the guy. He was useless. No matter how many times you explained something to T, he never took it in. He would always end up where he started, asking the same questions again. What was worse was this kind of vacant look that he had on his face. It just told you that nobody was home. He was completely void of all positivity too. He was the kind of guy who would just stand there, watching everyone else work their asses off without helping. He wouldn't do anything on his own initiative. He had to be asked, persuaded, or ordered. Another thing about him was he really didn't join in with any of our meetings. He would just sit there, hoping he didn't get picked on to provide an idea or answer a question. That goes the same for outside of work too. He wouldn't divulge any hobbies or anything too personal. I guessed he was just a private guy. I didn't like the way he worked, because I've always been very conscious about the eyes of others in my office. I mean, my job is loaded with stress. You have to have thick skin and have to be prepared to stay until the task was done. T wasn't that guy. We all had to watch our backs, progress, and attitudes on the clock. He didn't. I thought that T didn't care. He never seemed to think about how others saw him. But one day, he spoke out in the smoking area. It was kind of a mutter. Maybe he didn't even mean to say it out loud, but he did. And he said, "I'm really worried about getting in trouble at work." I said that if he didn't do something about the current situation, he could probably get in trouble sooner or later. Even though I told him about how the office works and how he should behave to fit in, he stood out like a sore thumb. He didn't watch himself. One lunch break, I was heading out to my car to get my charger. I got out of the elevator and headed out to the parking lot. I got into my car and plugged my phone in, rolled my window down, and lit a smoke. Someone came into the parking lot. It was T. He didn't notice me in my car, and to be honest, I didn't feel like giving him another pep talk during my break. So I didn't exactly wave him over to my car. I did quite the opposite. I kind of slumped down in my chair. T was on the phone anyway. He was pacing the parking lot, looking agitated. I heard a part of his phone call. Went something like this. "What don't you understand? Can't you think for yourself? You better watch your attitude. Do I have to literally show you how to do something step by step? Can't you do anything on your own initiative?" He was really going off on someone on the other end of that phone. I had no idea who he was speaking to, and honestly couldn't believe the words I was hearing coming out of his mouth. It was like he was recycling the lines of our seniors and some of the coworkers in the office had used on him when he messed up. I guess at least he learned something. Anyways, T didn't seem to notice that I was there in my car. I guess I shouldn't have overheard what I heard, so I kept it to myself. I didn't tell anyone in the office. They might have grilled him over it or something. A couple of weeks later, something happened. The police arrived at work, and arrested T. T had done something to his family. He was living with his parents as a single man and had apparently been violent with them. It wasn't a one-off incident. Rumor around town and around the office was that the neighbors put the call in to the cops as they couldn't take any more of the sounds of the thuds and screams. Everyone was talking at work in hushed circles of disbelief. Not that quiet guy. He isn't capable of something like this, is he? I was the only one, I guess, who had prior knowledge. The only one who heard what he was like on the phone that day, when the eyes of the office weren't on him. Yeah, he let his mask slip there. I guess that he was probably on the phone to his parents in the parking lot. He was a lion at home, but a mouse at work. He came across all meek at work, but at home, he was a monster. Were his parents the outlet for his stress he was under at work? Only he knows the truth, I guess. You want to know something that's even more messed up? He didn't get fired or detained long. I guess his parents ended up denying it. He still works at our company, but people take a wide berth nowadays. I'm worried about what is going on internally with that guy. I don't know his true nature. Sometimes I wonder if my coworkers and I helped create the monster he appeared to be at home. I don't know. We're all under the same pressure, I guess.
This happened when I was living in a rundown apartment back in my college days. The day wasn't that different from many others. I was sitting in my room drinking beers. By the time the sun went down, I was completely hammered. The beers made me feel pretty sleepy, so I thought I would go to bed early. Looking back on that kind of lifestyle gives me pangs of embarrassment. I was so lazy, I lacked motivation, I couldn't even be bothered to clean up my own room. It was so cluttered with trash, dirty dishes, clothes, empty cans, and the odd textbook. I was a lousy student. I had just enough room to crawl into bed each night. It helped that I had a loft bed, so at least when I went to bed, I was slightly elevated above trash level. So anyways, I headed to bed early and I slipped into a sound sleep. I was rudely awoken by the sound of a knocking at the door. I woke up and thought, what time is it? But then, when I looked at my phone, I realized that it was just after 8 p.m. I thought that it might be someone complaining or a door-to-door salesman, and I was way too comfortable in my bed to get up and deal with any of that, so I went on ignoring it. But the knocking continued, so I had no choice but to go and check it out. When I opened the door, I was still half asleep and still completely drunk. I was in complete shock to see, not one, not two, but many police officers standing out there with the landlord. I had only ever met the landlord once. One of the police officers were showing me something. I had no idea what it was. I was tired and drunk. It was probably a search warrant or something like that. They got tired of me not understanding what they were talking about pretty quickly, because before I knew it, some of the officers were pushing past me and into my apartment. I stood there for a while, and then I remembered the state of my apartment. It was ridiculously dirty, and the landlord was here. I thought that I better get in there and attempt to clean the place up. I pushed past the officers who stood around me and went into the room. Thinking back on it now, I could have gotten in trouble with the cops for obstruction, but somehow I didn't. As soon as I went into the room, I saw it. I saw what they were here for. The policemen were pulling something out of the attic hatch, wrapped in plastic. It was a long object. I was then brought back to the door by the officers and escorted out of my apartment. I was given a room in a hotel for the night. I had no idea what the hell was going on, but I knew it must have been something serious. The next morning, I was interviewed by the police. Well, I wasn't ready for what came next. The officer told me that human remains had been removed from my apartment. I was asked all manner of questions that I could barely answer. I mean, the answer to them all was simple. It wasn't me. I didn't know it was there, but convincing them that I was that ignorant was difficult. I guess it was kind of good that they saw my pigsty of an apartment, because at least then, they understood the filth I was living in masked the smell of decomposition from the attic. Eventually, I was informed that I wasn't a suspect in the case. I asked if the person who lived in the apartment before me smelled or suspected anything. The officer alluded to a kind of preservative on the body, which may have hid the smell, so no one noticed it before I moved in, not the landlord or the cleaning staff they hired. The officers only got wind of the possibility of a body being up there when an informant told them that the previous resident had said something about the attic. I wasn't happy. I had to move, and that's sort of where my experience ends. I will say that living with a corpse above me was a unique and creepy experience, and it did make me a little more hygiene and safety cautious. I'd even say that it made me more motivated too. Who knows, maybe being that close to death had an effect on me. I have given this a lot of thought over the years. It's mind-blowing that I was in that apartment for almost a year, and I had no clue what was up there in the attic, and all that separated me from the body was a thin layer of ceiling. I wonder if the corpse was facing down while I was sleeping facing up, because sometimes I had trouble sleeping in that bed. I always felt as if someone was watching me.
I feel like I'm being stalked. It all started during my morning commute on the train. I got into the rhythm of getting on the same train. I mean the one that departs at a certain time, not the same actual train. In addition to that, I usually get on the same carriage through the same door. You know what I mean, right? If you have ever commuted by train, you quickly figure out which is the best spot to board the train. I don't know if you've seen the trains in Tokyo, but they get incredibly crowded during rush hour. I almost always end up stood in front of a passenger, and then when they got off I was able to get a seat. It was just a routine to me. One morning I came to the realization that I almost always stood next to the same man on my morning commute. I figured out that he usually stood to my left. I looked over once and I noticed that his smartphone was in camera mode. It was on selfie mode, and it was aimed at me. Well, like most, I found that pretty damn creepy. I thought that before things got worse, I better switch the carriage I rode each morning to work. I really didn't want any kind of issues. I just wanted to get to work. It was a good plan in principle, but after a few days, I saw the same guy right at my shoulder again during the crowded commute. He was stood there, gawking at me. You know, a full-on stare. I could do little more than just smile when our eyes met. Having to do that made me feel incredibly sick inside, but I didn't want to cause a scene or give him some sort of victory over me. I got off as normal with no further incidents occurring, but I left the train more than a little freaked out. There seemed to be something on the horizon. I felt a sense of premonition. I thought about it at work. The problem still existed though. It wasn't like it was going to go away. I could change carriages much as I liked, but I still had to get on that train to get to work. The situation was unavoidable. About a month rolled around, and by then, I had gotten pretty skillful at picking different carriages to board each morning. I managed to avoid that strange man, and I began to relax a little. I wasn't too tense or clenched up each morning. I even slept a little easier at night. But one morning something happened which made my blood run cold. I was outside my office block, about to go in, when suddenly I felt an urge to turn around and check my surroundings. I don't know why, but maybe I felt that feeling when someone is watching you. I spun around and I saw the creep from the train staring right at me. He stood there glaring at me as still as a statue, amongst the hordes of passing pedestrians. And despite the city streets of Tokyo being full and bustling with life, It felt to me as if he and I were the only two people on Earth. Time stood still in that moment for me. He then approached me. I couldn't believe this guy's audacity. He said, "Hey, I've been checking you out ever since you got on the same train as me. I'm always looking for you each morning, you know? I guess I kind of fell in love with you. Heh. Can you believe that? So listen, tell me, do you work here?" I screamed no and ran for it. That morning I called the office and told them that I would be late. I hated that because I was supposed to deliver a presentation in the morning. It didn't go down well with my boss. A position at work came up that they were looking for someone to be transferred, and I went for it and got it. It could have been worse than it was, but it was traumatic enough for me.
This happened 4 years ago in March. I drive miles and miles for a living. I drive a truck. When you have a job like mine, you end up having favorite or least preferred areas for taking a nap or a rest, especially when you have a regular route. One of my favorite spots was beside this fairly big park. This park, it has roads surrounding it on all sides. All roads, other than the South Side Road, are pretty much redundant when it gets dark, making this a perfect place to pull into late at night. I think other truckers or long-distance drivers use this spot too. Sometimes I see a car or two when I pull in. Even in the daytime, it wasn't uncommon to see some people taking naps in their cars. The trees in the park, they create shade on each side, so it seems like a natural spot to relax. On the night my experience takes place, it's about 7 p.m. and I was taking an extended break. I pulled into the park area with the intention of taking a rest. That night, there were no other cars parked near there, just me. It was a quiet night. There was a clear sky and the moon was out in full. I thought that I would nap for maybe 2 hours and then get back on the road again. I set the alarm on my phone to go off at 9 p.m, got comfortable and shut my eyes. About an hour after I fell asleep, I suddenly woke up. This is one of the parts of my experience I have difficulty explaining. Rather than waking up, I found myself suddenly conscious. I cannot express that sensation properly, but that's the general idea. My eyes, they were still shut at this stage, but I was awake. The first thought that entered my conscious mind was, someone's watching me. Everyone knows that feeling, the feeling of being watched. It makes your skin crawl. I consider myself someone with no spiritual awareness. I lack the ability to sense the presence of ghosts. However, that night, I felt something. I distinctly remember the feeling of eyes, someone's glare from the driver's side window. I was feeling a bit worried, I'm not going to lie. I opened my eyes very slowly to see if anyone was out there or if my mind was just playing tricks on me. I planned on keeping my eyes half shut so that I would still appear to be asleep. But when I saw what I saw, I could not force my eyes from growing wide with shock. what I saw outside of my window was my own face, expressionless, staring back at me. The person who was on the other side of the glass looked identical to me, save for just one facial feature. The me outside the window didn't have a nose. In other words, I was looking at a mirror image of my own face, but it lacked a nose. I think it must be quite hard to visualize, but there was just nothing where the nose should be. The me thing was staring at me inquisitively through that window, as if I was some animal in an exhibition. It felt like there was no one but us here in the dark, isolated park by the road. I was so shocked by this that I literally jumped out of my seat and shouted. My sudden reaction, it seemed to freak out the me thing, and it turned and ran off into the night. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest that I felt as if it was about to burst. What the hell was that thing? Was it some kind of extraterrestrial? Some yokai? Some kind of cryptid? Why was it trying to imitate my face? Or did I simply hallucinate the whole thing? I was not under the influence, since I was working that night. I don't know if it was down to me being half asleep and my nightmares bleeding into reality, but this was the most horrifying experience that I have ever had. When I woke up in the middle of this thing's transformation, I must have prevented it from completely copying my identity. Well, this is my theory anyway. I know I must sound crazy, but I am constantly asking myself questions like, is there some kind of me out there in a half-finished state? After this experience, I have become terrified of sleeping in my truck. I have had scary dreams before, and I can say with hand on my heart that this was nothing like a dream. This was real. I think that thing hides in secluded places, waiting for victims like me. For whatever reason, I am unsure, but it gives me the chills when I think about it. If anyone knows anything about some sort of entity that copies or mimics people's appearances, then I would like to know.
This happened when I was in the lower grades of elementary school. I was living in an apartment complex at the time. I had my own bedroom, and it was a pretty big one. I've always been a heavy sleeper. I never usually woke up in the middle of the night, not even as a kid. When I was younger, I would only wake up if I was woken up. But not that night. I woke up for some unknown reason. I went to take a look at the clock and realized that I couldn't move. I couldn't even open my eyes. I had never felt like that before, unable to move. It was my first and only ever experience with sleep paralysis, and if you've never endured this horror, then I'll try to explain it. It's the feeling of total immobility and the terror of not knowing why. I was lying on my back, confused and frightened. I wasn't even able to open my eyes. I just felt incredibly strange. I felt something move at the foot of the bed, and I felt a weight almost climb onto the bed. The mattress depressed, and I felt the covers tighten. I wanted to pull my legs back. I say wanted, but I think it would have just been an instinct, a natural reaction. The only thing was I couldn't move a muscle. There was some heavy object moving slowly up the bed, and it was up to my shins. And I was fighting and fighting to move, but my body just refused. I didn't give up. I couldn't face lying there while something was advancing on me. I don't know if it helps to describe the situation, but later in life I got a dog, and the dog sometimes jumped up on the bed early in the mornings. Obviously I was safe in the knowledge that there was a dog in the house, and the additional weight added to the bed was expected, but imagine dog or cat owners feeling that, but your home was pet free. Oh, also at the same time, you can't even open your eyes to see the threat of what's in front of you. So I thought against the invisible bindings keeping me static in bed, and very, very gradually I was able to slightly move in bed. I slowly opened my eyes. They went up like slats in blinds. I saw a pair of white ankles in front of me stood on the bed, and that person's legs were so pale and thin. They looked feminine. I thought for a brief, hopeful moment that it was my mother, but I saw some white clothing fluttering. It was a thin kimono that I had never seen my mother wear. She never wore anything of the sort. The woman was stood over me, bent over. Her face was inches away from my own, and she was leaning closer and closer towards me. Her kimono dropped to around her ankles. I couldn't stand it anymore, so I shut my eyes again. And that was when I felt her black hair lightly caress my skin. I felt incredibly sick. My face was covered by her hair after a matter of seconds, and I could hear and feel her breath on my face. Even with your eyes shut, you know when there's a person right in front of your face. I was so scared I was really out of options, and since I had slowly regained some of my power, I decided to try and use it to shout at the top of my lungs, "Go away!" I wanted to scream, but it came out breathy and quieter than expected. I wanted a lion's roar, but I got little more than a whisper. Internally, deep down in my heart, it was as loud as thunder. The next thing I knew, I was opening my eyes to the light of the morning. I looked all around the room, and I was relieved to find that I was alone. To this day, I'm still terrified of the dark and being alone in the dark. I have also developed an unwanted habit. I wipe my face constantly, either with a handkerchief, my sleeve, or a face wipe. I cannot seem to forget the sensation of that hair against my cheek. I really hate it.
When I was in 6th grade, I often went to the park after school to play. It was always fun. But one summer's day, something weird and unforgettable happened. I saw a woman who looked just like me. She was an office worker, and she was clearly a lot older than me. But nonetheless, all of my friends said that she looked just like me. It was like she was the grown-up version of me. I remember that as soon as my friends laid eyes on her, they started shouting, "Hey, she looks like you." We were always noisy. I mean, that wasn't anything out of the ordinary. I guess that we were a rowdy bunch back then. Usually, when we were being loud, any adults or teenagers passing by would either tut at us or ignore us. But not that office worker who looked like me. She just stood there and stared at me and my friends. It was creepy, and once me and my friends had quieted down a little, we just kind of stared at the office worker, and we were stuck in a silent standoff. I started to get a little worried, and I didn't look away from the office worker, but I think that my friends were feeling the same as I was. I started to wonder if the person who was staring at us had some kind of sinister intentions. However, just as I was reaching the height of my concerns, the office worker stopped staring, and I chose that moment to look back at my friends just to see their expressions, and by the time that I looked back at the office worker, she was gone. After she went away, my friends and I slowly began to relax, and we got to a point where we were able to joke about the situation. They were making fun of me for having a creepy doppelganger. It was all fun and games that day, but when I thought about it later that night, there was something a bit less funny and a bit more disturbing about that experience. It was a weird day, and one I thought about for a while after. Fast forward to when I was 22 years old, I had a strange dream at that age. I was living in a city miles away from my hometown, but in the dream I had, I was alone in the same park that I used to play in as a kid. I felt very nostalgic to be back and somewhat lonely. I looked ahead into the park. It was a bright sunny day, and all the playground equipment looked nice and new, just like it did when I was a kid. I saw myself as a child playing in that park. I was with my friends, and I was laughing as my friends were pointing and screaming about someone who looked just like me. I just stood there like a statue staring, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I guess that I wasn't aware that I was dreaming. Suddenly, I felt an intense feeling that I wanted to leave. I felt as if I didn't belong there. I just needed to go. I wanted to go home. I felt a sense of fear which I can only describe as being lost. It was a very strange emotion to experience. I just wanted to go home, so I turned to leave. That's the last thing I remember before waking up. I expected to wake up at home, but I didn't. I woke up in a hospital bed. I had no idea how I got here. I was told that I had gotten into an accident while I was on my way to work. I used to ride to work on my motorbike. I have no idea who hit me, but I'm sure that they never got into any trouble with the authorities. It was a hit and run, and it turned out that I had just come out of a coma. Apparently, I was walking the tightrope between life and death, and if my life had been a candle, it would have been flickering. A few days after I regained my consciousness, I was finally discharged from the hospital. I left with worry in my heart, and I couldn't forget about the dream that I had before I woke up. I saw what I saw when I was in the 6th grade, and then again in a dream at age 22. I found that the clothes that I was wearing when I had my accident, I was wearing business clothes under my leathers. I saw my future self that day when I was younger. I am certain of that. I'm not sure why or how, but I know what I saw. Perhaps the reason that I am still here, the reason why I was able to wake up, was because of that interaction with what I thought at that time was a doppelganger. When I saw myself in the park as an adult, and I remembered the interaction, perhaps that was the trigger that I needed to wake up from my coma dream. It was absolutely unexplainable, but I count each day as a blessing. What was that? A glitch? Was I saved for some reason? Whatever it is beyond my comprehension, but I am grateful.
When I was in elementary school, I went to the countryside often with my family. My wider family were big fans of taking long nature walks. My dad's side of the family were mountain climber enthusiasts, so I had a lot of opportunities to play outside with my cousins. This experience takes place one late summer evening. I had been running around with my cousins playing games on and off the mountain trail. I was running off ahead from them and hiding behind things, and when they approached, I would jump out and attempt to scare them. They were a little bit older than me, and they wouldn't scare easily, but I really wanted to surprise them, at least once. I think they were quite content to let me run ahead and hide so they could carry on with their high school kid conversations. Each time I ran ahead, I tried to make my hiding place more and more difficult to find, and this would prove to be my downfall. I went too far off the mountain trail and got turned around. Before I knew it, I was deep in the dark woods, with no idea how to find my way back. I think I got lost when I mistook a different trail for the main trail. I followed this winding trail deeper and deeper into the woods. As evening turned into night, I felt tears well into the corners of my eyes, and I realized that I couldn't fight those tears back any longer. The realization that I had lost sunken in. I had fell to the seat of my pants and just started wheeling. I don't think my mind at that age could comprehend how hopeless the situation seemed. The final rays of sunlight slipped behind the dark, towering mountains, and night fell all around the forest. I remember screaming my cousin's name, alone in the darkness. I was so hoping that they or anyone would answer. My voice grew hoarse and I put my hands together and began to pray. I was utterly terrified of what might happen to me out there in the wilderness. I stood with my back against a tree trunk, watching the night sky turn pitch black. I was hoping that in a matter of seconds a grown-up would find me. And that's when I heard a voice. "Come here," it called. I didn't recognize that voice. It was not one of my cousins calling out to me. As I looked for the owner of that voice, I felt a strong tug on my wrist. Even though it was dark, I knew that there was no one around. It just didn't seem possible. The grip wasn't that strong, and it was warm. It gave me a strange sense of security. Whatever was holding my wrist didn't make a sound, but I instinctively feel as if it was a humanoid. I think I was talking, but it wasn't replying. I just remember feeling really safe. We started walking, and we didn't travel along the usual trails and paths. We went through the trees and the thick brush. The branches scratched me as we moved. Whoever was guiding me clearly knew the way. In what felt like a matter of minutes, I saw lights, the lights of people's houses, and after a while, I managed to recognize some. I saw a billboard which I recognized. I knew when I saw that I wasn't far from my grandpa's house. I felt the pressure release from my wrist as we stepped out of the forest tree line. I turned back to look, now that we were more in a light area, and I turned to say thank you. But whatever pulled me out of the woods was long gone. I just stood there, staring at the darkness beyond the trees. I didn't want to be anywhere near that darkness anymore, so I kept moving. But then, I stopped. I really wanted to thank whatever saved me, and I felt as if it was still around, just hiding by the dark. I stood there for a good 3 or 4 minutes, yelling thank you in all directions. Then I ran. I ran back to my grandpa's house. After the initial relief, and I guess the joy of seeing me return home safe, my family began to question me. They were incredibly worried and scared that they would never see me again, so they needed to know what happened. I told them what had happened, and they proceeded to make fun of me. My cousins were the worst. They said that I made it up because they had never heard of a cryptid or a monster from the mountains of Japan, which helped lost people. Well, it did happen. I just don't know how else to explain it. I wish that I could put into words the feeling I felt in those moments lost in the woods, but I cannot. All I can say is that I'm eternally grateful because, there but for the grace of God. I have heard this story end differently countless times. I could still be missing somewhere in that forest, and that thought really frightens me.
My hometown is surrounded by mountains. I spent many happy years playing with my friends in those mountains, building bases, hide and seek, the type of thing. The thing I enjoyed doing the most was exploring. Those mountains felt as if they were ours. One afternoon, my friend circle had grown a little bored of the standard forest trails. We wanted a little more adventure, so we decided to go off the beaten path. A decision that we didn't know at the time could have been life-altering, or even life-ending. We wanted to walk where others hadn't, so we headed deeper into the mountainous woods. There were a few of us, and it was late in the summer. The trees provided a lot of shade, so it felt cooler than it was. Even as young as I was back then, I knew the risks that we were taking, so I brought something along to help us not get lost. I lifted this little spindle of string from the art room at my school. I tied the end to a tree close to the forest trail so that we would be able to find our way back. It felt like a foolproof idea at the time. The ground was really uneven off the trail. It was littered with stones and dead tree limbs. We didn't mind it really because it made us feel as if though we were on an expedition. We were out in the elements and there was nothing but the sounds of our labored breath and the distant trill of insects. It was amazing. After walking for about 10 to 15 minutes, we came across a small hill. We climbed the hill, and when we got down to the other side, it opened out into a kind of clearing. I distinctly remember a big rock there. We figured that this would be a great place to take 5 and drink some water. One of my friends brought along some candy, so we were just tearing into that. And while we were taking a break, I noticed something strange. I almost missed it, but once I spotted it, I had to just go over and take a closer look. There was a toy lying on the forest floor. It was a toy for kids a little younger than us. We were in the 4th grade at the time, and once I announced my discovery to my friends, they all came over to take a look, and our expedition turned into an investigation. It wasn't just the one toy. There were others. Hot Wheels cars, and someone found a doll. Fear crept up on me. Seeing these objects in a place that they really shouldn't be frightened me. Maybe it was because at my age, my toys meant the world to me, and I'd never leave them lying around, especially not in the forest. I was worried that something had happened. We all stood around, puzzled, until one of my friends yelled out to us. He was pointing at something a little outside of the clearing. We all raced over to look at what he was pointing at, and this is where things became a little difficult to explain. There was a kind of altar constructed of clay-like mud. It was the weirdest thing. It was definitely a human construction. It didn't look natural. And this kind of altar construction was a hollowed-out section, and in that section was an object. I couldn't make out what it was at first, but it looked like a photo. Well, that just meant that we had to find out what the photo was. The photo was dirty, and it looked as if though it had been out here for a while. The photo was of a girl. It looked as if though it was a commemorative photo, like one that you might see at a graveside. That photo looked as if though it had been snatched right out of a cemetery. The forest around us, which was our background for the adventure, took on a different vibe. It seemed as if though we were somewhere we shouldn't be. It seemed as if all the calmness in our day had gone. I felt as if though someone could be out here with us, watching us. All of a sudden, I didn't want to be off the beaten path anymore. There was something so illogical about what we were looking at. The toys, the photo, the weird mud construction. It was just wrong. I wanted to run, and one quick glance at my friends' faces told me that they were on the same page. We followed the string back to the trail. We weren't in the mood to talk anymore,
and I didn't feel like myself until I got out of those mountains. Since that day, I never played off the trail. I still have a general idea of how to get to the clearing where we found that weird altar, but I have no interest in returning. My mind tortures me with questions that I can't answer. Why was that photo there in such a remote location? And the toys? Was it some kind of grisly memento of something that happened to the girl of that photo? Were we looking at some felon's trophies? The other thought that comes to mind is that perhaps the family who lost that girl couldn't afford a burial, and through perhaps shame, they created their own memorial site in an isolated location where they could mourn without disturbance. If that's the case, it's heartbreaking. It didn't make sense. Nothing about what I saw that day all those years ago made sense, and this experience lives with me.
In my life, I have had just one horrific experience, and thank God it's only one. I'm here to share this experience with you. I'm keeping names anonymous. Many moons ago, I was a college student. My friend had borrowed a camper van off his friend or relative. It was really sweet because it was big. It could sleep like 4 to 5 people. We had this great camper van out of nowhere, but we had nowhere to go. Me and my friend reached out to another friend of ours, and we as a group decided to pick some place to head on a road trip to. Everyone was excited. As soon as we got talking, everyone was full of ideas for destinations, some more realistic than others. We trusted in our friend, who seemed to have a really good place in mind, and with that, our plans for summer vacation were set in stone. The road trip was on. Well, our plan was to drive in the general direction of the place that our friend recommended. It was a hot springs kind of spa place. It seemed really cool, seemed like a nice way to relax and forget about studies for a while. And it was really fun as well, having a road trip, since we didn't really need to rely on hotels or anything like that. We could eat and drink in the van and be in peace. It was a cheap way to travel through Japan. We could go from place to place whenever we felt like. To us young university students, it was a real sense of freedom we hadn't experienced before. We were going further into the mountains through windy mountain passes. You know, taking in the scenery, the luscious green forests. We had had so much fun the night before, the first night we went out in the camper van. We ended up leaving really late, really hungover, on the second night to reach our destination, and the following took place at around 10 p.m. at night. We needed to go detox at those hot springs, and we were heading to one in the middle of nowhere. Seemed like the perfect way to end our little trip. The roads were getting more and more twisting and winding. It felt like every couple of minutes my pal was taking a hairpin corner. The streetlights were few and far between that far into the mountains. My friend was driving and the other friend was laying down somewhere in the back. We were chugging along the dark road when suddenly the car's headlights illuminated 2 figures in the middle of the road. They were walking into traffic. A parent and a child. Why the hell were they out here in the middle of the night? I'll never forget them. You'll understand why soon enough. There was a middle-aged woman holding a young boy's hand. The woman was wearing a cardigan, and the small boy looked to be about 2 or 3 years old, I guess. We had to swerve around them. Thankfully, we weren't going that fast, but we were going fast enough for it to be a kind of close call. To be honest with you, red flags at this point, you know what I mean? What the hell was going on here? Whatever it was, it didn't seem good, I thought to myself. Pretty sure my friend who was driving felt exactly the same as I did. He spoke up and said something to me. Weird time of night to be taking a kid that age for a walk on the roads out here, huh? Yeah, that's true. I guess they could live nearby, though. Well, I haven't seen a house for a long while, have you? I haven't even seen a street light. He wasn't lying, we didn't see much of anything out here. The satellite navigation didn't work too well, but it worked in little patches. I had been watching it every now and then, and I noticed the landmarks, stuff like the icons for restaurants and groceries. They just weren't there. It was literally just a mountain, and we were going to be on it until we got off it. There was no good reason for these people to be on this road at this time of night, just walking along, in my opinion. And the sat-nav's opinion, I guess. It was so weird. "Where are you guys going?" I muttered, and my friend looked over as we passed them. He was interested, and probably asking the same questions inside. It was really odd, but we knew that we would be at the hot springs soon enough, so we could evaluate things when we got there, I guess. And since my friend showed no signs of pulling over, we were on our way. The hot spring place had an RV park. It wasn't busy. There were a couple of cars and vans there, but that wasn't what struck us as odd. People were clamoring. They were up in arms in the parking lot. Even though it was late, there was loads of people walking around the premises, shining flashlights. Everyone seemed to be frantically looking for something. As we pulled the camper van to a stop, 2 men came running towards us. They said that a child had gone missing. A 2-year-old boy had disappeared. Apparently his parents took their eye off him for just a split second, and in that short window of time he vanished. My friend and I turned to each other as something simultaneously clicked in our heads. The middle-aged woman and the child we had just seen walking into traffic. We got the traumatized parents to look over the footage the dash cam took. The mother of the missing child was distraught when she confirmed that the little boy was her son. She begged us to take us there as soon as possible, and we agreed, of course. They jumped in the camper van, woke up our friend in the back who had no idea what the hell was going on, and we headed back the way we came. Some of the others from the parking lot followed on behind in their cars. Our friend in the back was asking loads of questions, but there was no time to answer him. We were just all so flustered. We drove down the winding roads, and things weren't looking good. There was no sign of the boy or the abductor. When all hope appeared to be lost, my headlights fell on a small figure crouching by the guardrail at the side of the road. It was the missing little boy. We hit the brakes, and the boy's parents ran to him. He wailed and wailed. His parents asked him what happened, and he said he was brought to this spot and told to wait by the woman who took him from the hot spring spa. She went off through a gap in the bush and trees and presumably would be back. It was so stressful. Both parents and child were crying tears of relief and fear, I guess. I had never seen anything like that before. Soon the police arrived and we went back to the spa. The police requested the dash cam footage and we happily provided it. They were treating the case as if it was an attempted kidnapping. We needed to get the dashcam memory stick thing back, so the police took our details, and the local cops kept us up to date with the case when they called to say we could get the memory stick back. The woman who took the boy wasn't caught. They had nothing to go on, no evidence, no motive, no idea where she was going to take the child or where she came from. I have wondered myself what the motive was. Perhaps she just meant to lead the boy off and abandon him. Maybe she wasn't ever going to come back, and she just intended to leave the kid by the side of the road. Such abandonment is kind of an ancient custom in some rural, mountainous areas of Japan. Maybe she was doing that for some reasons only known to her. I have no idea. Pure speculation. Maybe she was going to come back to him, or maybe she was going to take him someplace. There was something so malicious about the whole situation. Thinking back on it, I was glad to be suspicious about the situation when I first saw the woman and child. The image on the dash cam of the woman leading the boy away is one that will live with me. She was smiling, this really big smile. It was so disturbing. I don't think I'll ever forget that.